Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is a report on the current situation going on surrounding the Ukrainian war, which is turning into a war between NATO and the Russian Federation. One of the most profound moments of my journalism career back in the 1990s was when I got to cover the 50th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And I got to spend a couple of days there, did a lot of interviews, did a lot of reports, and one of the things I found rather, disturbing is really not the word for it. When I was looking up in the sky directly above what was called the hypocenter, in spite of what you see on TV, that cenotaph with the eternal flame in the Peace Park in Hiroshima, that's not where the bomb went off. The bomb went off a little bit off to the north from there, actually just above a hospital, which is still there. At least the subsequent hospital is still there. And I was shown up in the sky the approximate location the bomb was when it went off. And what was really amazing was how small an explosion it really was, how physically small it was compared to what's going on now. It was big, but not as big as you might think. And every time I see those pictures of all the people who were burned, all the many square miles that were set ablaze, it just shocked me that such things existed. Of course, I spent a lot of time talking to people who had survived the atomic bombing. They're long dead now, of course. I got to go through the museum there, which any human being that goes through and sees that, you're not going to come out the exit thinking nuclear weapons are a good idea. They should not exist. Really, they shouldn't exist. But they do. In recent days and weeks, we've been building up to a situation which has rattled the nerves of those of us who really understand what's going on. And it's getting to be deafening, the silence that we're hearing from certain circles. In the last day or so, things seem to have gone a little bit lower volume between Russia and the belligerents in Europe. That includes the United States, NATO, and, of course, Ukraine. Quite a few cages got rattled by that new intermediate-range ballistic missile. It was not an intercontinental ballistic missile, as was originally reported, but for the sake of argument, it's just as potentially devastating to the people of Europe. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. Intermediate range is a few hundred miles. And considering Russia is in Europe and the United States is across the Atlantic, that was a real point of contention back in the 1980s when the U.S. was very strong militarily and we were at the height of the Cold War. Back in the day, the Russians had a missile called the SS-20, and the U.S. was putting in something called the Pershing II. In fact, I do believe, if memory serves me right, they used to have those on display. You had a Russian SS-20 and a Pershing II missile on display at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. It was to celebrate the fact that they weren't being used. Nice thing to have on display for that purpose. However, back in the day, having these very accurate, for the time, ballistic missiles pointed at each other across Europe was reason for concern. That's why back in 1997, after several years of negotiation, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan sat down and signed something called the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which basically eliminated these weapons in the European theater. The Russians destroyed all their SS-20s, the Americans did not deploy their Pershing IIs and retired them shortly afterwards. Now, this treaty was taken up by the Russian Federation after the Soviet Union collapsed, and both sides kept to it. It was a good treaty. It limited weapons which were harder to control than the conventional nuclear missiles that you have in silos and on submarines. It was a real good idea. Any treaty between military powers that limits use of certain types of weapons are always a good idea. But unfortunately, back in 2019, yes, during the Trump administration, the United States, or I should say the Trump administration, decided to withdraw from this treaty and basically end it. The reasons being were officially given that the Russians were not adhering to it. They were, but they had come up with a new type of missile which, depending on the type of warheads used, would be medium or intermediate. It was a bit of a confusion in terms of technology, which if you had good intentions, you would have been able to probably find a way to amend the treaty. However, they also thought it would be a good idea to get out of it because of China. There's a complicated explanation. Doesn't matter. It was thrown away, which, of course, gave the Russians carte blanche to start developing these weapons again. Now, a few days ago, a brand new missile system, which the Russians call the Oreshk, I believe that's the way it's pronounced, which rained down a total of 36 explosive warheads on Ukraine, destroying a missile factory and a munitions factory, as the reports are. This thing is medium range, the same sort of weapon that scared the bejesus out of NATO back in the 1980s, and it's hypersonic, goes about Mach 10. That's 10 times the speed of sound. That's fast. And you can't stop it. Now, we've seen the video of how this thing worked, and it worked very well. The Russians are producing them and now are going to mass produce them. So in the very near future, you are going to have a lot of these things. The exact number I don't know. I could only guess at, and I'm not into guessing. But there's going to be enough to basically hold all of Europe hostage. Think about it. These things are hyper-accurate and hypersonic, and the Americans and the Europeans have nothing that can counter them. Now, if Russia decided to have a lot of these things deployed quickly and put nukes on them, they literally could ask for NATO to surrender. And the only thing NATO could do, or the United States, would be to launch nuclear missiles from silos or from its submarines and destroy the Soviet Union, destroy the whole planet. I don't think Russia's going to do that, but they have the potential and the capability of doing that. Never mind that the United States has been giving weapons to the pirate state of Ukraine, which is what it's become, that are being launched on Russian soil. And again, the Russians are a little skittish about people invading their country. It's happened a couple of times and was pretty devastating. But each time it's happened, they fought it off. So I think that might serve as a bit of caution for the way certain governments are proceeding. They've developed these weapons, and who knows what other toys they have up their sleeve. If Vladimir Putin wanted to demand the surrender of Europe, he could do so with this technology. And the United States has just started to test this sort of technology, certainly not being manufactured or deployed. So this is where we are. And I have some other bad news. The United States does not have the moral authority. It doesn't have the military might. It doesn't have the diplomatic finesse. And it doesn't have the respect that it did in the 1980s, when it was able to bring the Soviet Union to the negotiating table and get rid of these types of weapons. Through incompetence, stupidity, political maneuvering, the military-industrial complex wanting to make more money, well, whatever the reasons, we're not going to see any new treaties in this department anytime soon, if ever. So what do we do about it? More specifically, what does the incoming administration do about it, and what do the average Americans or average Europeans do about it? Well, as I always like to say, don't pray for peace, pray for sanity, because then peace would follow. But the incompetence and imbecilical attitude that's been going on for years in the United States and in Europe and in Russia, to be fair, has brought us to this. I was doing some research on the history of all of our nuclear capabilities and weapons on the American side, and if you look at the amount of money, the amount of resources, the amount of brain power, the amount of academic research that was done to create this massive monstrosity that, if it works, is going to wipe out all life on planet Earth, you just have a hard time looking straight. Well, there is some talk now about a rally in Washington, D.C. on December 7th, an anti-nuclear war rally. Wow. Nice idea. I don't know if that's going ahead. There are some people talking about it, and we'll probably know more over the next few days. Since I'm in the neighborhood, I might just stop by if that goes on. But I would urge everybody, especially the listeners in Europe, to please, at this point, stand up and tell the leaders of your country that you don't want this. Your lawmakers, the people in your bureaucracies, your monarchs, if that's appropriate. Now, Mr. Putin, if he really, really wanted to take over Europe, he could do so. He could do so today. NATO is not very strong right now. And he could easily hold it hostage with this new intermediate range missile. I don't think he wants to do that. The biggest cause of turmoil in our world, the most common cause of war, is misunderstanding and miscalculation. And we are very close to that right now. Remember what I was saying ahead of the election? The United States government was never designed to be ignored by its people. Well, now is the time to really get active. And I don't mean just going out and vote. I mean get on the phones and talk to your neighbors and talk to your congressmen and your senators. Call the White House switchboard. Not that anyone there is going to listen, but everybody breathes the same air and, as John F. Kennedy said, is mortal. This is one of those times in history where we cannot just sit down and do nothing. I'll let you know if something's happening on December the 7th in Washington, D.C. In the meantime, let people know what you think. This is not a time to keep your opinions to yourself. This is something that affects everybody. Doesn't matter what religion you are, doesn't matter what your political leanings are, doesn't matter what your racial background is. None of that means anything if it all blows up. Most people alive today have no clue as to what these weapons are capable of, especially in the quantity in which they exist and could be used on a moment's notice, at the drop of a hat, or if somebody screws up somewhere along the line and makes a mistake that we are all going to pay for. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like and subscribe and share, and consider a paid subscription. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. And on other social media platforms, save Facebook. This podcast originates at Substack. The address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the Deep State must be destroyed. Good day.